Assalamu alaikum. Myself, Dr. Kalim Ahmad, Assistant Professor, Department of Wildlife Sciences. Today I'm here to discuss a topic, protected area network. Before going to the further slides, I organized my whole lecture into different topics. That's importance of protected areas, roles of protected areas, definition of protected areas, the link between convention of biological diversity and protected areas, different categories of protected areas according to Indian context, rules and regulation relating to protected areas. This I am also going to discuss according to Indian context, and the last one, issues concerning the management of the protected areas, and this I am also going to discuss according to Indian contexts. As we all know that protected areas are known today to be a useful tool to manage and to preserve the biological diversity. Some people even say that they are the cornerstones of the conservation strategies. This explains the dramatic increase in number and in surface over the recent years. These protected areas preserve species, some are threatened species, as we can say here. Specific ecosystems are rare habitats. They are trying to preserve the environments in its natural states, or at least with as little change as possible. So, it has become necessary to clarify what is and what is not to be protected areas, so that tools, the knowledge, and the practices that are developed specifically for their management or good governance may be put to good use. The work to define the protected areas has already literally long story which starts in 1930 when experts started to try and clarify the terminology used to name all the protected areas then in existence. Many works followed afterwards in the courses of international congresses, parks, and various meetings that took place with a constantly improved definition that has progressively adjusted to the evaluations of these territories. The definition currently in force, which we will look at today, was set in 2008 during the World Conservation Congress organized by IUCN. So let's have a look at the definitions given by the President of the World Commission on Protected Areas in 2008. A protected area is actually the clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve the long-term conservation of the nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. It is extremely important to properly understand each word and what they represent in case of protected areas definition. The best way to do this is to yet again to read the guidelines and the definitions carefully given by the IUCN, President and IUCN Commission on Protected Areas. It is extremely important to properly understand each word. Every word in the definition is important. I would like to insist here on few of them in particulars. They are the words defined, recognized, managed, and of course conservation of nature. So defined a protected area is a territory that can be identified. We know where it starts and where it ends. So this means that its boundaries can be identified, but this does not necessarily require marking signs or fences. Sometimes it can actually be very difficult to follow the boundaries of the park, especially when they are associated with natural elements like a river or a forest that can of course change with time. And World Commission on Protected Areas, actually it's very important to know about the World Commission on the Protected Areas. It is one of the six specialist groups of the IUCN. It was created in 1958 and today it is managed by the global program of the IUCN on protected areas. The commission today counts about 1800 members in 140 countries in the world. What is interesting is that its mission is to set up or at least promote an international representative network of marine, terrestrial, protected areas that are managed effectively. It is also important to know about the Convention on the Biological Diversity and linkage between Convention on Biodiversity and protected areas. As we all know that what actually the biodiversity is. Biodiversity means the variability among living organisms on three levels. As we all know, these are genetic resources, genes level, these are genetic resources, species, the species level, the ecosystem, the habitat. The biological resources of the earth are vital for the economic and social development of the mankind. Consequently, there is an increasingly greater recognition that biological diversity is a global asset of incalculable value to present and future generations. At the same time, to date, the threats of the species and the ecosystems have never been greater. The extinction of the species of the human activities has continued at alarming pace. In 1988, the United Nations Environment Programme convened the ad hoc working group of the experts on biological diversity in order to explore the creation of International Convention on Biological Diversity. The convention was opened for signatures on 5 June 1992 during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit of Rio. Nowadays, about 196 countries are contracting parties to Convention on Biological Diversity. The Convention on Biological Diversity has three main objectives, which they work the conservation of the biological diversity, the sustainable use of its components, and the last one, the equitable sharing of the benefit arising out of their utilizations. There are three main objectives as stated. These are the three main objectives stated in Article 1. These three aspects, conservation, sustainable use, and sharing of the benefits, are all the root of the whole philosophy of the conservations. Other articles are also important. For example, Article 8 on in situ conservation, Article 9 on ex situ conservation, and Article 10 on sustainable use of components of the biological diversity are very relevant for protected areas because our concern is about protected areas. Article 18 and has 13 paragraphs that all are interest to us. In particular, paragraph A of Article 8 on the establishment of the system of the protected areas. Paragraph B on the development where necessary of guidelines for the selection, establishment and management of the protected areas. And paragraph H on prevention of the introduction, control or eradication of alien species which threaten ecosystems, habitats or species. Though these articles, what does the CBD remind us? Protected areas are the cornerstones of the conservation of the biodiversity. They preserve key habitats, offer sanctuaries, allow for the migration and the displacement of the species, and maintain natural processes in the whole landscapes. Protected areas don't just safeguard preservation of the biological diversity, they also ensure the well-being of the mankind. Protected areas allow some 1.1 billion people to survive, are the main source of drinkable water for over a third of the world's largest cities, and offer a major guarantee for global food security. This we discussed about linkage between the convention and why convention of biological diversity is important for the protected areas. So before going further, we'll discuss about what was the world first national park was established. World first national park was established by the US Congress and signed into law by the President on March 1st, 1972 and named as Yellowstone National Parks. It was also the first national park of the US. And in Indian context, the first national park was established in 1936, known was Halle National Park. Now it is known as Jim Corbett National Park and located at Uttarakhand. The biggest national park of India is Hemis High Altitude National Park in UT of Ladakh, followed by Desert National Park about 1220 square kilometer miles in the state of Rajasthan. The third largest national park is Gangotri National Park, which is about 922 square miles, located within Uttarakhand. Number 4 on the list is Namdapha National Park, which lies within Arunachal Pradesh and extends over 766 square miles. This is all about the world first national parks and India's first national park that was established for the conservation of the biodiversity. Now, because we are interested in Indian context, and I'm going to discuss about the protected areas of India. So before going further, it's important to know, and we all know that India is one of the 17 mega diverse countries of the world, with only about 2.4% of the world land area, 16.7% of the world human population, and 18% of the livestock. It contributes about 8% of the global biodiversity. However, putting enormous demands on our natural sources. India is home to world largest wild tiger population and also got a unique assemblage of the globally important endangered species like Asiatic lion, Asiatic elephant, one-horned rhinoceros, gang-ravaged dolphin, snow leopard, Kashmir stag, bustard, lion-tailed macaque. These are some of the important species. Globally, there are about, according to the database of World Database on Protected Areas, there are about 2,36,204 protected areas, which covers about 245 countries and territories, and it covers about 10 to 15% of the world land surface area. In India, a network of 868 protected areas has been established, extending our 1,65,088.57 square kilometers, represent 5.2% of the total geographic area of the country, comprising about 104 national parks, 550 wildlife sanctuaries, 87 conservation reserves, and about 127 community reserves. Till date, there are 50 tiger reserves in India. UNESCO has designated 5 protected areas and World Heritage Sites. As the ecosystem and the species do not recognize political borders, the concept of the transboundary protected areas has been initiated for coordinating conservation of ecological units and corridors with bilateral or multilateral cooperations of the neighboring nations. There are about 4 categories of protected areas: the national parks, sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and community reserves. What actually the sanctuary is? We'll discuss one by one. Sanctuary is an area which is of adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural, or zoological significance. The sanctuary is declared for the purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environments. Certain rights of the people living inside the sanctuary could be permitted. Further, during settlement of the claims, before finally notifying the sanctuary, the collector may, in consultation with Chief Wildlife Warden, allow the continuation of any right of any person in or over any land within the limits of the sanctuary. And the second one is national park. National park is also an area having adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural, or zoological significance. The national park is declared for the purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment, just like sanctuary. The difference between a sanctuary and a national park mainly lies in the vesting of the rights of the people living inside. Unlike a sanctuary where certain rights can be allowed, in a national park no rights are allowed. No grazing of any livestock shall be permitted inside a national park, while in a sanctuary the chief wildlife warden may regulate, control, or prohibit it. And third category, the conservation reserves. Conservation reserves can also be declared by the state government in any area owned by the government, particularly the areas adjacent to the national park and sanctuaries, and those areas which link one protected area with other. Such declarations should be made After having consultation with local communities, conservation reserves are declared for the purpose of protecting landscapes, seascapes, flora and fauna and their habitats. The right of the people living inside a conservation reserves are not affected. And the last and fourth one is community reserve. Community reserve can be declared by the state government in any private or community land not comprised within a national park, sanctuary, or a conservation reserves, where an individual or a community has volunteered to conserve wildlife and habitats. Community reserves are declared for the purpose of protecting fauna, flora, and traditional or cultural conservation values and practices. As in case of the conservation reserves, the right of the people living inside the community reserves are not affected. This is all about the four different kind of protected areas in India. And now we'll discuss the rules and regulations relating to the protected areas. The protected areas are constituted and governed under the provision of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 of India, which has been amended from time to time with the changing grown realities concerning wildlife crime control and protected areas management. Implementation of this act is further complemented by other acts as Indian Forest Act 1927, Forest Conservation Act of 1980, Environment Protection Act of 1986, Biological Diversity Act of 2002, and Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest development recognition of Forest Act 2006. The Wildlife Crime Control Bureau of the central government supplements the efforts of the provisional government in wildlife crime control to information of the sites and control of the wildlife crimes having cross-border, interstate and international ramifications. In order to strengthen and synergize global wildlife conservation efforts, India is a party to major international conventions, with Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, also known as CITES, International Union for Conservation of the Nature (IUCN), International Convention for Regulation of the Whaling, UNESCO World Heritage Committees, and Convention on Migratory Species, and so on. There are a number of other international organizations which India is also a member. And in the last slide, we will discuss about what are the main issues concerning the management of the protected areas. Wildlife and conservation and management in India is currently facing a myriad of the complex challenges that are both ecological and social in nature. Issues such as habitat loss, fragmentations, our use of biomass resources in the context of the biotic pressure, increasing human-wildlife conflict, livestock dependence on forest and wildlife resources, poaching and illegal trade in wildlife ports and products, need for maintaining a broad base of public support for wildlife conservation. Exemplify and characterize the contemporary wildlife conservation scenario in India. The government and the civil society are taking several measures to address this issue. Improved, we can say that improved synergies and better coordinations among the wide area of the stakeholders are needed to meet the challenge of the conserving India's diverse wilderness resources. This is about protected area network of the India. I try to compile these things in a few slides. Thank you very much. Hope you understand what I want to convey. Thanks.